In this deep dive, you're going to learn exactly how costing works in real businesses so you can confidently answer CIMA P1 exam questions.
Right. And we are basically going to be your expert tutors today. We're taking you through Chapter 1 of the CIMA P1 Management Accounting Syllabus.
Yeah, the BPP Learning Media course book specifically. And our mission today is to, well, move way beyond just memorizing definitions. We want you to get a really deep, practical understanding of costing.
Exactly. I mean, we'll be looking at what costing actually is, why it forms the absolute backbone of management accounting, and, how costs behave when a business is under pressure.
Plus, how modern organizations actually use all this data to survive. And for you, listening right now, consider yourself the third person in the room with us.
Yeah, pull up a chair.
Right, I'll be asking the questions that you're probably already thinking. We're going to break down this complex theory into clear, actionable exam insights.
It's going to be fun because costing, it's not just a dry math problem. It's how businesses stay alive.
Okay, let's unpack this because I think when most people hear the word accounting, they immediately picture, I don't know, someone looking backward, like a historical record of what we already spent.
What's fascinating here is that you're actually describing financial accounting, which is, looking in the rearview mirror. But management accounting is completely different.
Right, it's not for the tax authorities.
Exactly. It's for the managers inside the business. Management accounting is looking out the windshield. It's all about the future.
So it's about figuring out what we're going to do next, not what we did last year.
Spot on. And we can break this down into 4 main pillars: planning, control, decision-making, and inventory valuation.
Okay, planning makes sense.
Yep.
Setting budgets, right.
Yeah, defining objectives. If you want to launch a new product, you have to plan the costs for the future. You need a budget.
And then control. That would be checking if we actually stuck to that plan.
Right. It's comparing the budget with the actual results. If your materials cost, say, 20% more than you planned, you need to know why so you can control it.
Got it. And decision-making. That's, I guess, using this data to figure out pricing.
Exactly. Like, should we make this component in-house or buy it from a supplier? You can't make that decision if you don't know your own costs.
Right. But what about that last one, inventory valuation? That sounds a bit more like financial accounting.
It does, yeah. But management accountants need to set predetermined standards to value whatever is left on the warehouse shelf at the end of the period because, well, that affects your reported profit.
Which affects decisions. Okay, so now that we know why we care about the strategy side, we need to figure out what a cost actually is.
Right, we have to decode the definitions, the building blocks.
So if I'm a business, how do I even start?
You start with a cost object.
A cost object, which is what exactly?
It's simply anything we want to know the cost of. It could be a single unit, a department, a customer.
Just whatever we're trying to measure.
Exactly. And we track that using a cost card, which is basically a recipe of all the costs that go into that specific object.
Okay, but not all costs are the same. Let's use an example. Say I have a business making wooden tables.
Great example.
So the wood for the table, that's pretty obvious. I can measure exactly how much wood goes into one table.
Right, and because you can specifically identify it with a single unit, we call that a direct cost. Direct materials, specifically.
And the person building it, the carpenter.
If you can track their exact hours to that one table, that's direct labor.
Okay, and if I had to, I don't know, rent a special tool just for that one specific table design?
That would be a direct expense. And if you add those 3 together, direct materials, direct labor, and direct expenses, you get the prime cost.
The prime cost. Okay, so that's the core cost of the object. But what about the other stuff? Like, if I'm making a wooden table, the wood is my direct material. But what about the glue or the electricity running the saw?
Right. So technically the glue is part of the table.
Yeah, it's physically holding it together.
But are you really going to track how many cents worth of glue goes into each joint?
No. That sounds like a nightmare.
Exactly. It's not worth the effort. So for convenience, we treat things like glue or screws as indirect materials. They are part of the overheads.
Oh, okay. So overheads are just indirect costs.
Yes. Indirect materials. Indirect labor, like the factory supervisor who oversees everything but doesn't build the tables, and indirect expenses, like the factory rent or electricity.
And those indirect costs can't be traced to a single table.
Exactly. And for the exam, you need to know exactly where that line is drawn between direct and indirect.
So if I take my prime cost, which is all the direct stuff, and I add my indirect manufacturing overheads.
Then you have your production cost. the total cost to manufacture the goods.
Okay, but how do I keep track of all those overheads, like the rent and the supervisor and the glue? Do they just go into a giant spreadsheet?
Well, we collect them in what we call cost centers. It's a collecting place for costs before they get analyzed.
Like a bucket for different departments?
Basically, yeah. And there are two main types: production cost centers, where the actual manufacturing happens.
Like the cutting department.
Right. And service cost centers, which just support the factory, like the maintenance team or the cafeteria.
They don't make the product, but they cost money.
Exactly. So once we have all our costs in these buckets, we have to organize them. We have to classify them.
Okay, but why do we need to classify them? If a cost is a cost, why do we need like 3 different ways to classify the exact same dollar spent? Isn't that just creating busy work for accountants?
It sounds like it, right? But classification matters immensely because, remember, management accounting doesn't have strict external rules. Managers classify costs based on what they need to manage.
Okay, give me an example. What are the 3 ways?
We classify by nature, by function, and by behavior.
By nature, what does that mean?
It's what the cost actually is: materials, labor, or expenses.
Okay, pretty straightforward. And by function?
That's where the cost belongs in the business. Is it a production cost, an administration cost, or a marketing and selling cost?
So a production manager really only cares about the classification by function because they just want to see the factory costs.
Exactly. But a strategic planner, someone trying to scale the business, they need the third type: classification by behavior.
Behavior, like how a cost acts.
Yes, how it reacts to changes in activity levels. This is the most critical classification for short-term decision-making.
Because it tells us what happens when we ramp production up or slow it down.
Exactly. So let's look at the 4 main cost behaviors. First, fixed costs.
That would be like the factory rent. It stays the same no matter how many tables I make.
Right. The total stays the same, but the fixed cost per unit goes down as you make more tables.
Because I'm spreading the rent over more tables.
Got it.
And variable costs.
Those increase directly with output. The more tables you make, the more wood you buy.
So the total variable cost goes up, but the cost per unit stays the same. One table always takes $50 of wood.
Spot on. Now the third one is SIP to costs.
Like a staircase.
Yes. It's a cost that is fixed up to a certain point, and then it suddenly jumps up.
Oh, like if my supervisor can only manage 10 carpenters, once I hire the 11th carpenter, I need to hire a second supervisor.
Perfect example. The cost steps up. And finally, we have semi-variable costs, or mixed costs.
Meaning they have a bit of both?
Yeah, they contain both a fixed and a variable element. Think of a phone bill or an electricity bill. There's a fixed line rental fee, and then a variable charge for the actual usage.
Okay, but if I'm a manager looking at a total electricity bill of, say, $1,000, how do I know how much of that is fixed and how much is variable?
That is where the high-low method comes in.
Yeah.
And you absolutely need to know this for the exam.
Okay, let's walk through it. How does the high-low method actually work?
Let's use the storm break coast illustration from the textbook. It's a step-by-step process to separate that semi-variable cost.
All right, I'm ready. Step 1.
Step 1 is to look at your historical data and identify the period with the highest output and the period with the lowest output.
Output, not cost.
Exactly. Always select based on the units produced, not the dollar amount. So for storm break, the highest output was 53,000 units, and the total cost for that was $820,000.
Okay, 53,000 units, $820,000.
And the lowest output was 32,000 units at a total cost of $505,000.
Got it. High point and low point identified. What's step 2?
Step 2 is to find the difference between those 2 points.
So 53,000 minus 32,000 units. That's a difference of 21,000 units.
And the difference in cost.
$820,000 minus $505,000. That's $315,000.
Right, so an extra 21,000 units costs an extra $315,000. Now, step 3 is to calculate the variable cost per unit.
How do I do that?
Well, remember, fixed costs don't change, so that entire extra $315,000 must be purely variable cost.
Oh, so I just divide the extra cost by the extra unit?
Exactly.
Okay.
$315,000 divided by 21,000 units.
Which gives us $15 per unit.
Correct. You found the variable cost per unit. Now, for the final step, step 4, we substitute that variable cost back in to find the fixed cost.
Okay, so let's use the high point. 53,000 units. If the variable cost is $15 per unit, I multiply 53,000 by 15.
Right, which is $795,000. That's your total variable cost at the high point.
But the total cost was $820,000, so the difference must be the fixed cost.
Exactly. $820,000 minus $795,000 gives you a fixed cost of $25,000.
So what does this all mean? We just cracked open that semi-variable number. The fixed part is $25,000 and the variable part is $15 a unit.
Right. And now management can use that formula to predict future costs.
But wait, isn't drawing a straight line between just two extreme points of data a bit dangerous for predicting the future? I mean, what if that high point had some weird anomaly?
You're completely right. It is a bit dangerous. In reality, fixed costs only remain constant over what we call a relevant range.
So if production doubles, we might need a whole new factory, which blows up our fixed costs.
Exactly. The high-low method assumes you stay within that relevant range.
Yeah.
But despite its flaws, it's an essential, highly testable tool for CIMA students because it lets managers make rapid tactical decisions when they don't have perfect data.
That makes sense. Okay, so we know how costs behave, but the math has to change depending on what kind of business you're running, right?
Absolutely. Context matters. Costing a physical object is very different from costing a service.
Yeah, let's talk about manufacturing versus service businesses, because services seem way harder to cost.
They are. The textbook highlights a few reasons why. First, intangibility. You can't touch a service, so there were usually very few direct material costs.
Right, an accounting firm doesn't buy lumber.
Exactly. Second is heterogeneity. Every service is slightly different. A haircut for one person might take 20 minutes, but an hour for someone else. You can't just standardize the cost as easily as you can for a wooden table.
And then there's simultaneous production and consumption.
Right, you consume the haircut as it's being produced. You can't build up an inventory of haircuts to sell later.
Which leads to perishability.
Yes. An empty hotel room or an empty seat on a flight. Once that night passes or that plane takes off, the revenue opportunity perishes permanently. But you still had to pay the fixed costs of running the hotel or flying the plane.
So if I'm an airline, my costing strategy is all about filling those seats to cover the massive fixed costs, because the variable cost of one extra passenger is tiny.
Exactly. Now, depending on the nature of the output, organizations will use either job costing or process costing.
Okay, job costing. That's for unique, separate projects, right? Like building a custom house or a bridge.
Right. You track the specific materials and labor to that one specific job.
And process costing.
That's for continuous production of identical items, like refining oil or brewing beer.
You can't track the cost of one single drop of oil.
Exactly. So you just collect all the costs for the period and average them out over the total output.
Averaging it out. Got it. Now, here's where it gets really interesting. Digital cost objects, things like VR headsets, software, or digital downloads.
The digital economy has completely changed costing.
Because the cost structure is so weird, right? You have these massive fixed costs to develop a game, like millions of dollars in R&D, but the variable cost to let one more person download it is almost zero.
Exactly. High fixed costs, incredibly low variable costs. And digital products have unique challenges. You have ongoing development for patches and updates and evolving revenue streams like subscriptions.
It's not just a one-time sale anymore.
No, it's not. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, the text uses a very real, very serious example, Cambridge Analytica.
Oh, right. Data privacy.
Yes. Security and compliance are massive, often overlooked cost drivers for digital objects. A data breach isn't just an IT issue, it's a colossal costing and valuation nightmare.
Yeah, I mean, the fines, the loss of customer trust, the legal fees, it can destroy a company.
Which is why those compliance costs have to be built into the digital cost object from the very beginning.
So we've talked a lot about tracking and defining costs. But how do modern organizations use all this theory to actually stay competitive, like actively managing the costs?
This brings us to the CGMA cost transformation model. It's about moving from just tracking costs to actively transforming them.
Transformation, meaning what exactly? Just cutting budgets?
No, actually, it's the opposite of just blindly cutting budgets. It's about creating a cost-conscious culture, incorporating sustainability to reduce material waste, and most importantly, generating maximum value.
Generating maximum value. Let's look at the real-life example from the text. BT, British Telecommunications.
Yes. The call center example.
Right. So BT had these call centers, and on paper, they looked at their costs and decided to offshore them to save money on direct labor.
They were measuring the cost per call. And by offshoring, that specific unit cost went way down.
But it was a disaster, right? Because the quality of service dropped. Customers had to call back 3 or 4 times to get a problem fixed.
Exactly. The cost per call was low, but the total number of calls skyrocketed, so their total costs actually went up, and customers were furious.
So they transformed their costing approach. They brought the call centers back to the UK, which meant hiring more expensive labor.
Yes. On paper, it looked like their costs were going up. But they changed their metric. They stopped measuring cost per call and started measuring cost per successful outcome.
Because the UK staff were highly trained, they could solve the problem on the first try.
Exactly. Calls took longer, and the hourly rate was higher, but the total volume of calls plummeted. Overall costs went down, and customer satisfaction went up.
It proves that costing isn't just about finding the cheapest option. It's about connecting products and services with actual profitability.
It's a fundamental shift in how managers have to think. And here is a detail from the text that you absolutely must remember for the exam. 80% of a product's costs are determined before production even commences.
Wait, really? 80%?
Yes, during the design phase.
Wow. So by the time the factory manager gets the blueprints, they can only really control about 20% of the costs. The rest is already locked in by the materials and the design choices.
Exactly. Value engineering at the design stage is where true cost transformation happens.
Okay, we have covered a massive amount of ground today. Let's summarize the really crucial exam takeaways for everyone listening.
First, make sure you deeply understand the difference between direct and indirect costs and how they combine into prime and production costs.
Second, master the high-low method. Know the 4 steps inside and out. Find the extreme output levels, calculate the differences, find the variable cost per unit, and substitute to find the fixed cost.
And remember the relevant range. The high-low method only works if activity levels stay within that specific boundary.
Third, understand how context changes everything. Service costing is tough because of intangibility and perishability. Process costing averages things out. Job costing tracks specific unique items. And digital costing has massive fixed R&D, but tiny variable costs.
And finally, remember the BT example. Cost transformation is about maximum value, not just the lowest unit cost.
So, as you go about your day-to-day, look around your own workplace or even a coffee shop you visit. Try to mentally classify their costs. Is that barista a direct or indirect cost? Is the espresso machine a fixed or a stepped cost?
It's a great exercise. It takes the theory off the page and puts it into the real world.
And it brings us to one final, really provocative thought to leave you with, based on that CGMA model we just talked about.
Right. This raises an important question. If 80% of a product's costs are locked in during the design phase, before a single item is actually manufactured, does that mean the most powerful financial managers in a company aren't the accountants, but the designers?
Something to think about as you study. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.